The trouble started on a quiet spring morning, the kind where the air smells of damp earth and blooming clover. I'd lived on my 5-acre slice of heaven for a decade, a rural haven where my bees hummed and my dog, Pixel, chased butterflies. At the end of my gravel drive stood my pride and joy, a custom mailbox hand-carved with my family name in elegant script, built to withstand any storm. It was more than a mailbox, it was a statement of home. I never imagined it become a battleground. Karen Davis, my neighbor of 2 years, had a knack for stirring up trouble. She'd gripe about my beehives, claiming they'd sting her precious poodle, despite the hives being 200 feet from her property. I ignored her complaints, assuming she'd tire herself out. Then she set her sights on the creek that ran along our shared boundary, a narrow waterway I'd accessed for years via legal easement. The creek was perfect for watering my garden, and its gentle burble was the soundtrack to my evenings. Karen, it seemed, wanted it for herself. One Saturday, I found her hammering metal posts into the creek bank, stringing wire for a fence that cut off my access. Her platinum blonde hair glinted in the sun, and her smirk said she was spoiling for a fight. "This is my land now," she snapped when I approached. "The HOA says I can secure my property." I blinked. The HOA, our small homeowners association, mostly handled road maintenance and the occasional picnic. Since when did they meddle in easements? I kept my cool, fetching my property survey and the easement deed from my filing cabinet. The documents were clear. The creek access was mine, recorded with the county in 2012. I handed Karen copies, explaining politely but firmly that her fence was illegal. Her eyes narrowed, and she clutched the papers like they were a personal insult. "We'll see about that," she hissed, storming off. I figured she'd sulk and move on. I was wrong. The next day, Deputy Rogers knocked on my door. Karen had called the sheriff, claiming I was trespassing on her land. Rogers, a lanky man with a no-nonsense drawl, listened as I walked him to the creek. I showed him the survey, the deed, and the county's plat map. He scanned the documents, then glanced at Karen's half-built fence. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Karen, who'd followed us arms crossed, "this easement's legal. You need to take those posts down. Have a pleasant day." His tone was polite but final. Karen's face reddened, but she didn't argue. Rogers tipped his hat and left. I thought that was the end of it. Then I came home from work on Monday to a gut punch. My custom mailbox was gone, replaced by a generic cluster box bolted to a concrete slab. A typed note from the HOA was taped to it. For neighborhood uniformity, individual mailboxes have been replaced with a centralized unit. Contact the board with questions. No vote, no notice, no discussion. The cluster box was ugly, its metal slots already rusting at the edges. My carved mailbox, a gift from my late father, was nowhere in sight. I called the HOA president, a meek retiree named Harold, who stammered that Karen had pushed the change through an emergency board meeting. Emergency? For mailboxes? Harold admitted no vote was held, and my blood boiled. Karen wasn't just after my creek, she was flexing her influence over the HOA to control the entire neighborhood, starting with my mailbox. I'd seen her cozying up to Chandler, the HOA's treasurer, at last year's picnic. Now it clicked, she had an ally, and they were playing dirty. That night, I sat on my porch, Pixel snoring at my feet, and stared at the empty spot where my mailbox once stood. Karen's fence posts still littered the creek bank. She hadn't removed them despite Roger's warning. Her porch light flickered across the field, and I knew she wasn't done. This wasn't just about a creek or a mailbox. It was personal, and Karen Davis was ready to escalate. I wasn't about to let her win. The war escalated 2 weeks after Deputy Rogers shut down Karen's fence scheme. I came home from a long day at work, expecting the usual calm of my rural sanctuary. Instead, chaos greeted me. My wooden fence along the creek was sliced in 3 places, the cuts clean and deliberate, like someone had taken a saw to it. Deep tire tracks gouged the muddy creek bank, and one of my beehives, a labor of love for my pollinator garden, lay in ruins. The frames were splintered, honey oozed into the grass, and angry bees buzzed in confusion. Worst of all, the cluster mailbox that replaced my custom one was defaced, my slot spray-painted with neon green streaks. The message was clear: Karen wasn't backing down. Then I heard Pixel yelp. My border collie, usually bounding with energy, limped toward me, a nail embedded in her paw from a board half buried near the fence line. I rushed her to the vet, heart pounding. The $250 bill included antibiotics and a warning to watch for infection. Pixel's whimpers broke me. This wasn't just property damage, it was personal, and I was done playing nice. I ordered 4 motion sensor cameras with night vision, the kind that ping your phone every 10 seconds until you mute them. By dusk, they were mounted on my barn, fence posts, and a tree overlooking the creek. Next, I called Nora Beltran, a licensed surveyor with a reputation for precision and grit. She arrived the next morning, her pickup kicking up gravel. Nora staked my property with fluorescent orange markers and slapped laminated signs on each one. Tampering with survey monuments is a felony. $5,000 fine. She even double-checked the easement, confirming my creek access was airtight. "Let's see them mess with this," she said, dusting her hands. That night at 1:13 a.m., my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. The cameras had caught something. I opened the live feed and saw 2 figures in hoodies creeping along the creek. One, tall and lanky, wielded bolt cutters, yanking Nora's stakes with practiced ease. The other, shorter, with platinum blonde hair spilling from her hood, tossed the stakes into the water. Moonlight caught her face, Karen, no question. Her partner's face flashed briefly, and though I didn't have facial recognition software, I didn't need it. Deputy Rogers later confirmed it was Chandler, a local troublemaker he'd hauled in before for petty scams. I called Rogers at dawn, uploading the footage to a secure drive. He watched the video in my kitchen, his jaw tightening. "That's enough for a warrant," he said, already radioing for backup. By 7 a.m., he and 2 deputies were at Chandler's rundown trailer. Body cam footage, which I saw later, showed Chandler in sagging pajama pants, swearing he'd been asleep all night. Rogers held up a still from my camera, Chandler mid-grimace, bolt cutters glinting. "Care to explain this?" Rogers asked. Chandler's mouth snapped shut. Karen's house was next. Rogers found my stolen stakes in her garage, stacked beside Nora's laminated signs and a can of neon green spray paint, the same shade on my mailbox slot and my no trespassing signs now defaced. Karen, in a silk robe, claimed Chandler had stored tools there without her knowledge. Rogers wasn't buying it. He bagged the evidence and read her rights. Both were cuffed and hauled to county jail. Karen posted bond by noon, her lawyer already spinning excuses. Chandler, on probation for a 2021 check-kiting scheme, wasn't so lucky. His probation violation meant a no-bond hold. As I swept up the last of the broken beehive, Pixel napped in the shade, her paw bandaged but healing. The cluster mailbox still stood, a daily reminder of Karen's HOA power grab. I called my lawyer Elliot, who suspected the mailbox swap was tied to Chandler's role as HOA treasurer. "Let's dig into their books," he said. The cameras were still rolling, and I had a feeling the creek, the mailbox, and Karen's schemes were just the tip of a much bigger iceberg. The arrests were just the beginning. Karen and Chandler thought they could bully me into submission, but they'd underestimated my resolve overall. I wasn't about to let them get away with it. My lawyer Elliot, a sharp-witted former prosecutor, was already on the case. He subpoenaed the HOA's financial records to trace the $3,500 spent on the cluster mailbox that replaced my custom one, and the illegal gate Karen had tried to erect across my creek easement. What we found was a bombshell that cracked the case wide open. Elliot uncovered a cashier's check signed by Chandler, the HOA's treasurer, drawn from the reserve fund. The mailbox swap, pushed through without a vote, was Karen's brainchild, a petty power grab to enforce uniformity and flex her influence. But the gate and mailbox were just the start. Digging deeper, Elliot found $46,900 in checks for grounds improvements that never happened, phantom projects like non-existent landscaping and fake irrigation upgrades. Chandler had been siphoning funds for years, and Karen's gate and the mailbox were the latest in his fraudulent schemes. The HOA board, a mix of retirees and overworked parents, was blindsided. At an emergency meeting, their faces paled as Elliot presented the evidence. Harold, the jittery president, stammered apologies, admitting Karen had bullied the board into approving the mailbox change without proper procedure. The board voted unanimously to press charges against Chandler and to cooperate fully with the investigation. They also sent me a $4,500 check recovered from Chandler's frozen accounts to repair my shattered beehive. It felt like a small win, but the loss of my custom mailbox still stung. Detective Miriam Page from the county's white-collar crime unit took the lead. She seized Chandler's home computer and unearthed a digital trail of deceit, forged receipts, fake meeting minutes, and a Word template for neon green approval stamps used on fraudulent documents. Worse, Page found transfers to Karen's personal account, labeled as consulting fees for work she never did. The total, nearly $12,000. Karen wasn't just complicit, she was profiting. Karen lawyered up fast, hearing James Hall, a $600 an hour defense attorney who refused to answer questions. His silence spoke volumes. Chandler, however, was sweating, facing new felony charges, embezzlement, forgery, and conspiracy, plus a probation revocation for his 2021 check-kiting scheme. He was desperate. Page offered a deal, testify against Karen, and the DA would recommend a 4-year sentence with parole eligibility in 2. Chandler, cornered, agreed. His testimony would be the nail in Karen's coffin. While the legal gears turned, I focused on reclaiming my land. I rebuilt the creekside fence, stronger this time, with galvanized steel posts. Nora Beltran, my surveyor, double-checked her fluorescent stakes, which now stood untouched. The bees were buzzing again, their new hive humming with life. Pixel, my border collie, was back to chasing squirrels, her paw healed, though I still checked it daily for infection. The cluster mailbox remained an eyesore, but Elliot filed a formal complaint with the HOA, citing their own bylaws requiring a member vote for such changes. He was confident we'd win restitution or force them to reinstall my original, if we could find it. Karen's arrest hadn't stopped her influence entirely. Rumors swirled that she was rallying neighbors from jail, claiming I was overreacting. But the evidence was undeniable. My cameras had caught her and Chandler yanking stakes and tossing them into the creek at 1:13. Deputy Rogers' raid on her garage had turned up the stolen stakes, Nora's signs, and a can of neon green spray paint matching the vandalism on my mailbox slot, and no trespassing signs. Chandler's plea deal only tightened the noose. As I walked my property at dusk, the creek's gentle burble soothed my nerves. The cameras blinked steadily, their red lights a quiet promise of security. The HOA's apology letter sat on my desk next to Elliot's latest filing. Small wins were adding up, but the real fight was coming. Chandler's testimony loomed, and Karen's trial would expose every dirty detail of their scheme, mailbox, gate, and all. I was ready. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and nervous sweat. After months of legal maneuvering, the trial of Karen Davis and Chandler Reed was underway, and I was ready to see justice served. My lawyer Elliot had built an airtight case, but the real game-changer was Chandler's decision to flip. Facing a probation revocation for his 2021 check-kiting scheme and new felony charges for embezzlement, conspiracy, and criminal mischief, he took the DA's deal, plead guilty, and testify against Karen for a reduced sentence. His betrayal was her downfall. Chandler's plea hearing came first. He admitted to violating probation, earning an automatic 18-month sentence for the old fraud. For the new charges, stealing $46,900 from the HOA, forging documents, and vandalizing my property, the DA offered 4 years with parole eligibility in 2, contingent on truthful testimony. In a gray jumpsuit, Chandler took the stand, his usual bravado gone. He laid out Karen's scheme with chilling clarity. She'd orchestrated the land grab, promising him a slice of my creekside property if the HOA annexed it. The cluster mailbox, forced on the neighborhood without a vote, was her idea to assert control, funded by Chandler's pilfered HOA reserves. He handled the dirty work, cutting my fence, smashing my beehive, spray painting my mailbox slot, all under her orders. The trial itself was electric. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Lena Cruz, played my motion sensor camera footage on a courtroom screen. At 12:47 a.m., Karen and Chandler loaded rebar into her SUV, their faces clear in the moonlight. Another clip showed them yanking Nora Beltran's survey stakes and tossing them into the creek, Karen's platinum blonde hair unmistakable. The jury leaned forward, riveted. Cruz then presented Deputy Rogers' evidence: the stolen stakes, Nora's laminated signs, and a can of neon green spray paint from Karen's garage, matching the vandalism on my no trespassing signs and mailbox slot. Bank records sealed the deal, showing $12,000 funneled to Karen as consulting fees from Chandler's embezzled funds. Karen's lawyer, James Hall, tried to spin her as a victim of Chandler's schemes, but the evidence was crushing. Hall's $600 an hour bluster couldn't erase the footage of Karen hurling stakes or the paper trail tying her to the HOA's looted reserves. Chandler's testimony was the final blow, detailing her orders to deface my property and push the mailbox swap to teach me a lesson. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: felony conspiracy, theft, criminal mischief, and misdemeanor trespassing. Sentencing was swift. Corinne's bond was revoked and she stood, lips pursed, as the judge handed down 18 months in prison. She was ordered to pay $32,000 in restitution to me for damages, fence, beehive vet bills, and $46,900 to the HOA for the embezzled funds. A 5-year no-contact order would follow her release, barring her from contacting me or stepping foot on my land. Chandler, already serving time, faced his own penalties, but his cooperation spared him a harsher fate. As Corinne was led away in cuffs, I caught her eye. I gave a small, polite wave, not out of malice, but because it felt like closing a chapter. The mailbox issue lingered, though. My custom mailbox, a carved heirloom from my father, was likely gone, destroyed or discarded during Corinne's uniformity crusade. Elliot was still pressing the HOA to admit fault for bypassing their own bylaws, and the $4,500 they sent for my beehive was a start. But the cluster box stood as a daily reminder of Corinne's overreach. I wasn't done fighting for its removal, or at least compensation for my loss. Sitting on my porch that evening, Pixel curled at my feet, I watched the creek glint under the setting sun. The bees hummed in their new hive, and my reinforced fence stood strong. The cameras blinked, no longer needed but still vigilant. Corinne's defeat was sweet, but the real victory was reclaiming my peace. The HOA, shamed by the scandal, was already planning reforms: a new board, transparent finances, and maybe even a vote to ditch the cluster mailbox. Elliot warned me the restitution might trickle in slowly, but the symbolism mattered. I'd won, and the creek was mine again. The next steps, rebuilding, healing, and maybe planting a few more sunflowers, felt like a promise to myself. With Corinne in prison and Chandler behind bars, the dust began to settle, but the scars of their schemes lingered. The HOA, humiliated by the revelation of Chandler's $46,900 embezzlement and Corinne's mailbox power grab, scrambled to clean house. They elected a new board, honest folks like Sarah Nguyen, a local teacher who valued transparency. At their first meeting, they mailed me a formal apology, typed on crisp letterhead, acknowledging their failure to follow bylaws when Corinne forced through the cluster mailbox without a vote. Enclosed was a $4,500 check drawn from Chandler's seized accounts to repair my shattered beehive and Pixel's vet bills. It wasn't enough to replace my custom mailbox, hand-carved with my family name, but it was a start. My lawyer, Elliot, was still pushing for the HOA to remove the cluster box or compensate me for the heirloom they'd discarded. I decided to reclaim the land Corinne had tried to steal. Where her illegal fence once stood, I broke ground on a greenhouse, a sturdy frame of cedar and glass designed to catch the morning sun. The creek, now unobstructed, burbled nearby, its water feeding my vision. I hauled in rich soil, planting tomato starts, basil, and peppers, their green tips poking through by week's end. The air smelled of possibility, and each nail I hammered felt like a stake in my victory. The bees, thriving in their new hive, buzzed happily, pollinating my garden. Pixel, her paw fully healed, romped through the grass, chasing dragonflies with her old spark. Watching her, I felt a weight lift. We were healing. The cluster mailbox remained an eyesore at the end of my drive. Its neon green vandalism faded but not forgotten. Elliot's complaint had the HOA on edge. They'd admitted their bylaws required a member vote for such changes, and Sarah promised a special meeting to address it. I wanted my mailbox back, or at least a custom replacement funded by the HOA's negligence. Elliot was optimistic, citing precedents where HOAs paid damages for unauthorized alterations. "We've got them dead to rights," he said, flipping through case law. I trusted him, but the fight wasn't over. Then, like a bad sequel, trouble stirred. A certified letter arrived from Elaine Castor, claiming to be Corinne's cousin and heir. She insisted Corinne had granted her a private right-of-way across my creekside property, citing a supposed deed from 2020. The document, attached in grainy photocopy, smelled of fraud. Its notary seal was smudged, and the signature looked like Corinne's handwriting. Elaine's letter demanded I grant her access or face a lawsuit. My gut said this was another of Karen's schemes hatched from her prison cell to stir up chaos. I forwarded the letter to Elliot, who chuckled. "This is amateur hour," he said. "We'll bury it." I wasn't worried, but I was annoyed. My cameras, still blinking along the creek, were ready for any trespassers. Nora Beltran, my surveyor, offered to recheck her stakes for free, ensuring no one could challenge my boundaries again. The creek was mine, the greenhouse was blooming, and Pixel's tail wagged like a metronome. Yet Elaine's letter reminded me that peace was fragile. I doubled down, checking my fences daily and saving every email from the HOA. Sarah called to confirm the mailbox vote was set for next month, and I sensed a shift. The neighborhood was tired of Karen's legacy. As I tended my greenhouse, the tomato vines climbing their trellises, I reflected on how far I'd come. The $4,500 had rebuilt my hive, but the real restitution was this land free of Karen's grasp. The bees danced in the sunlight and Pixel napped in the shade. Elaine's claim was a nuisance, but Elliot was already drafting a cease and desist, backed by Nora's survey and county records. I knew we'd crush it, just as we'd crushed Karen and Chandler. The HOA's new board was planning a community garden on surplus land, a project I'd been asked to advise on. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen's control-freak tactics had birthed a movement for unity. But before I could fully embrace these new opportunities, I needed to slam the door on Elaine's scheme and settle the mailbox fight. The creek burbled, the greenhouse glowed, and I was ready for whatever came next. The greenhouse was thriving, its tomato vines heavy with fruit, when Elaine Castor's fraudulent claim landed like a wasp in my oasis. Her letter claiming a right-of-way across my creekside property was a transparent ploy, likely cooked up by Karen from her prison cell. My lawyer Elliot tore it apart in hours. The supposed deed was a forgery, the notary seal was fake, the signature a clumsy mimic of Karen's scrawl, and county records showed no such easement. Elliot sent a cease and desist letter backed by Nora Beltran's survey and my original deed. Elaine, faced with a court date she couldn't win, withdrew her claim before the hearing. "Coward," I muttered, filing her letter away. The creek was mine, unchallenged, and my cameras stayed vigilant. Restitution began to trickle in, small but symbolic. The state's crime victim fund sent checks garnished from Karen's prison wages, $58 a month, a drop in the $32,000 she owed me for damages and the $46,900 owed to the HOA. At that rate, it'd take decades, but each check felt like a tiny victory. I deposited them with a smirk, imagining Karen scrubbing dishes in the prison kitchen to pay for my fence, beehive, and Pixel's vet bills. The cluster mailbox, still a sore point, was finally addressed. The new HOA board, led by Sarah Nguyen, held a vote and admitted their error in bypassing bylaws. They offered $1,200 to replace my custom mailbox, which I used to commission a new one, oak, carved with my family name, just like Dad's original. It stood proud at my drive's end by month's end, erasing Karen's uniformity scheme. Then came a surprise, a letter from Chandler postmarked from the state penitentiary. He'd earned a paralegal certificate and wrote with unexpected sincerity, apologizing for the vandalism, the embezzlement, and the pain he'd caused. Enclosed was a hand-drawn map suggesting orchard placements for my property, apple and pear trees along the creek. "I know it doesn't fix things," he wrote, "but I'm trying." I read it twice, torn. His remorse seemed genuine, but trust was hard-earned. I wrote back, brief but civil. "Sunflowers are taller than ever. Keep learning." No promises, but it was a door left ajar. The real triumph came from an unlikely source. Sprout Tomorrow, an organic farming nonprofit, had bought Karen's foreclosed property after her conviction. They reached out, inviting me to consult on planting native pollinators to support local bees. The irony was delicious. Karen's manicured lawn, once a symbol of her control, was now a blank canvas for community good. I met their director, Leela, at the site. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and we sketched plans for milkweed, coneflowers, and bee balm. "This'll be a haven," she said, gesturing at the empty lot. I nodded, picturing Karen's scowl if she knew. Sprout Tomorrow's first work day was a revelation. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to showed up with shovels and seedlings. Sarah from the HOA brought coffee, and even Deputy Rogers stopped by, trading his badge for a trowel. We ripped out Karen's ornamental shrubs, replacing them with raised beds for tomatoes and squash. I loaned my brush cutter, and by noon the lot was transformed, dirt turned, seeds planted, and laughter filling the air. My bees would love this, and Pixel pranced among the volunteers, soaking up pats. Standing there, I felt the weight of the past year lift. Karen's schemes, her fence, the mailbox, the land grab had backfired spectacularly. As I watered my greenhouse that evening, the new mailbox gleaming in the dusk, I reflected on the journey. Elaine's defeat, Karen's slow-paying debt, and Chandler's apology were threads in a larger tapestry. The HOA was reformed, my land secure, and my bees buzzing. Sprout Tomorrow's garden was more than a plot, it was proof that good could grow from greed. The creek burbled, a quiet anthem of my victory. I wasn't done yet, the community garden needed tending, and I'd be there, shovel in hand. But for now, I savored the full circle. From Karen's hostility to a field of pollinators, from a stolen mailbox to one carved anew. Pixel nuzzled my hand, and I knew we'd earned this peace. Karen's old lawn, once a battlefield of her control, was unrecognizable. Sprout Tomorrow, the organic farming nonprofit that bought her foreclosed property, had turned it into a vibrant community garden. Raised beds brimmed with tomato vines, zucchini, and sunflowers, while native pollinators like milkweed buzzed with my bees' cousins. The irony was poetic. Karen's reign of HOA tyranny, her illegal fence, the stolen mailbox, had birthed a space for unity. I stood among the beds, soil under my nails, feeling a final victory take root. Sprout Tomorrow's first volunteer day was a triumph. I arrived with my brush cutter, ready to help clear the last of Karen's ornamental relics. Neighbors poured in, families, retirees, even Sarah Nguyen from the reformed HOA board, her sleeves rolled up. Deputy Rogers showed up, trading his badge for a rake, his grin wide as he hauled compost. "Never thought I'd be gardening on a call," he quipped. I loaned my cutter to Leela, Sprout Tomorrow's director, who carved paths for wheelchair access. By noon, we'd planted rows of peppers and beans, the air thick with laughter and fresh earth. My role felt personal. I'd advised on pollinator plants, ensuring the garden would thrive for bees like mine. Each seedling I pressed into the dirt was a rebuke to Karen's schemes. Her attempt to steal my creek, her vandalism of my hive, her unauthorized cluster mailbox that replaced my carved heirloom. That fight was won. The HOA's $1,200 had funded a new custom mailbox, oak and etched, standing proud at my drive. But this garden was bigger than my battles. It was redemption for every neighbor Karen had bullied. The transformation was therapeutic. Where her fence posts once scarred my creek bank, now sunflowers swayed. Where her spray paint defaced my signs, now trellises climbed. We worked until dusk, Rogers joking about arresting weeds, kids racing with watering cans. Pixel darted among us, tail wagging, her heeled paw kicking up dirt. I caught Leela's eye and she nodded. "This is what community looks like," she said. I agreed, my chest light. Karen's land, once a symbol of division, was now a garden for all. My greenhouse thrived nearby, my bees danced, and the creek sang. This victory wasn't just mine, it was ours. As I drove home, my new mailbox gleaming, I saw the garden's first blooms in my rear view. They promised harvests to come, proof that from Karen's hostility we'd grown something beautiful. October's golden light bathed the community garden as Sprout Tomorrow hosted its first harvest dinner on what was once Karen Davis's property. The irony was as rich as the soil. Karen's lawn, a stage for her HOA tyranny, her illegal fence, her theft of my custom mailbox, had become a thriving patchwork of raised beds and pollinator patches. Now long tables stood under string lights, laden with dishes sourced from the garden, roasted butternut squash drizzled with my bees, honey, garlic-glazed carrots, and heirloom tomato bruschetta bursting with flavor. Neighbors laughed, clinked glasses, and passed plates, the air alive with warmth and gratitude. I sat near Leela, Sprout Tomorrow's director, who raised a toast to the volunteers. She gave me a nod, her eyes twinkling. "To our pollinator whisperer," she said, and the crowd chuckled. I shrugged, cheeks warm, but their applause felt like a hug. My role advising on milkweed and coneflowers to draw bees had helped make this garden a haven. Each bite of squash, each sip of cider was proof that Karen's schemes had failed. Her attempt to steal my creek, her vandalism of my hive, her unauthorized cluster mailbox all crushed. The HOA, reformed under Sarah Nguyen, had paid $1,200 for a new custom mailbox, oak carved with my family name, restoring what Karen stole. Elaine Castor's forged right-of-way claim was dead, buried by Elliot's legal precision. Karen's $58 monthly restitution checks trickling from her prison wages were a slow but satisfying sting. The real monument to victory was my new barn, built where Karen's fence once scarred my land. I'd salvaged wood from her old shed, seized after her conviction, and hired a local carpenter to craft a sturdy frame. Permitted and painted red, it stood as a testament to resilience, housing tools for my greenhouse and space for Pixel to nap. The barn's beams, once part of Karen's schemes, now supported my future: tomato starts, beehive frames, dreams of an orchard inspired by Chandler's unexpected letter. His apology with its hand-drawn map lingered in my mind. I hadn't forgiven him, but his gesture hinted at redemption, a seed I'd let sit. As the dinner wound down, kids chased fireflies across the garden, their giggles mingling with the creek's burble. Deputy Rogers, who'd helped plant the first beds, swapped stories with Sarah, both marveling at the transformation. Pixel wove through